am Maya Caldwell, 19 years old, living in a small town called Cedar Hollow in Ohio, and I have always felt like the world was a place where I had to work twice as hard to get half as much. My family was never rich, but we had a garage full of tools that my uncles used to tinker with anything that had an engine, and that made me feel a little proud even though the house was cramped and the bills were always high. When I was 16, I finally passed my driver's test, and my aunt, who owned an old 80s sedan that had been in the family for years, decided to give it to me after trying unsuccessfully to sell it in the newspaper because the ad price was higher than anyone would pay. I spent countless evenings in the garage replacing the brake lines, the steering column, the brakes, and even the alternator so that the car could keep running a few more years, because that car was the only way I could get to school, to work, to the grocery store, and to the place where I could relax after a long day. I knew what it felt like to be poor, but I also knew that we had tools, and that gave me a small sense of power. One hot July afternoon, my cousin Aaron, who had been staying with us while he finished high school, showed up with his friend Tyler. They needed a lift to the car dealer where Tyler's truck was being repaired under warranty, and they begged me to drive them because the truck was still at the dealer and they could not get it any other way. My car's alternator had just died a week earlier, and the battery was barely holding a charge after an overnight charge that gave me only 22 miles of range. But I agreed because I hoped that they would give me enough gas money to fill the tank and maybe a little extra for the next week. I told them that I would need them to jump-start the battery with jumper cables before we left, and they promised that they would give me $5 for the gas and that they would meet me at the car after they got the truck. I dropped them off at the dealer, watched them walk inside, and then walked back to my car, feeling a mixture of hope and nervousness. Inside the dealer, the truck was not ready yet, so they spent about 10 minutes at the service desk, and when they finally came out with the keys, they handed me a $5 bill and said they would meet me by my car. I stood by my car, waiting for them to pull around, and when they finally did, a loud song was blasting from their truck. They laughed. My cousin flicked his middle finger at me, and they screeched the tires and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with a dead battery and no money for gas. I knew my battery could not get me home, because I had measured the charge down to the exact voltage, and I also knew that the dealer would not let me jump the car for free. I walked to the service desk and asked if anyone could pull my battery and put it on a charger for 20 minutes or at least give me a quick jump, and the clerk said no, that they did not do that for customers. I felt my anger rising like a storm inside me, and I tried to call every number I could remember, because in the 90s, we still used paper phone books and we knew phone numbers by heart. After many rings, I finally reached a family friend named Mr. Jensen, who lived a few blocks away, and he said he could bring a jumper cable in a few hours. I spent the next 2 hours sitting in the cold lobby, watching other customers come and go, while my mind replayed the scene of my cousin's rude gesture and the sound of the truck's engine revving away. When Mr. Jensen finally arrived, he gave me a jump, handed me $20 for the alternator fund, and left, and I drove home with a mixture of relief and fury. When I got home, the first thing I did was go to my room and pull out an old AV cable that I used for my Nintendo 64, the only video game console I owned. I cut the cable and rewired it so that it would only work when I pressed a hidden switch I had installed behind the wall, and I hid the normal cable in a drawer. That night when my cousin and his friend came over to play the game, the picture on the screen was fuzzy, the colors were wrong and the game would not start, and they cursed and blamed the console, not knowing that I had sabotaged the cable. They were angry, but I felt a small spark of satisfaction because they could not enjoy the game that they had taken for granted while I was stuck at the dealer. That was phase 1 of my plan, a quiet revenge that gave me a taste of control. Phase 2 was more daring. A week later, I was at a gas station filling up my car, and I called the warehouse where Tyler's father owned a distribution center, pretending to be a concerned citizen who had overheard a conversation about employees smoking weed while operating forklifts. I told the manager that I knew Tyler and Aaron from school, and that I feared they might be a danger to the other workers, and I suggested that they be drug-tested for safety. The manager listened politely, asked for more details, and then said he would look into it. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of guilt and triumph, but I kept my mouth shut because I wanted to see what would happen. A few days later, the manager called the warehouse and arranged for a random drug test for all employees. Tyler and Aaron were both selected, and the test came back positive for marijuana. The manager called them both and told them they were being terminated immediately, and that the truck that Tyler had been driving for the company would be taken away as part of the disciplinary action. Aaron was left without a job, without a license, and without a way to get around, because he was a year older than me but still could not drive his own car. He called me in a panic, yelling that he had lost everything, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. I felt a cold knot in my stomach as I realized that my plan had worked, that the two men who had treated me like an afterthought were now paying a price for their disrespect. I thought about how they had used my house as a place to smoke and to play video games while my parents were not home, and how they had taken my battery, my time, my money, and how I had finally taken something back. But the story did not end there. A few weeks later, I received a call from my aunt, who had heard about the incident at the warehouse from a neighbor. She asked me why I would do something so cruel, and she reminded me that family should stick together, even when they make mistakes. I realized that my revenge had not only hurt my cousin, it had also hurt my family's reputation in Cedar Hollow, and that the gossip in town was spreading faster than the wind. I felt a pang of regret, and I decided to do something that would make up for the damage I had caused. I went to the local community center and signed up to volunteer as a tutor for younger kids who needed help with math and reading, and I also offered to fix the old car that my aunt had given me to someone who needed a reliable vehicle. I spent my evenings teaching, my weekends working on engines, and slowly I began to feel a different kind of satisfaction, one that came from building rather than destroying. One night after a tutoring session, Aaron showed up at the community center, his eyes red from lack of sleep, and he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note that said, "I am sorry for what I did. I lost my job because of you, but I also realized how selfish I was. I want to make things right. Please take this money for the alternator, and let me help you fix the car." He also left a few $100s that he had saved from a part-time job he had found after being fired. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and I realized that my revenge had forced him to grow up faster than he wanted, but it also gave him a chance to change. I accepted his help, and together we repaired the car, and the engine roared back to life, louder than ever. In the end, I learned that revenge can be a powerful fire, but it can also burn the ones you love, and that the best way to heal a broken heart is not by breaking someone else, but by building something new together. The twist in my story is that the very person I tried to punish became my partner in fixing the car, and the community that once whispered about my actions began to see me as a model citizen who turned a bitter betrayal into a chance for growth. And I finally felt that the world, even in Cedar Hollow, could be a place where a 19-year-old girl could rise above the hurt and become someone who helps others instead of only seeking revenge.